The most credible version of the mythicist theory is that Christianity began as a Jewish apocalyptic sect who started worshipping a celestial god figure called Jesus. Apocalyptic sects believed that God was good and just, but not all-powerful, and was involved in a heavenly conflict against Satan and his demons. Satan had managed to take over the world, leading to misery and suffering, but exploited a universal law of justice that God could not change, which was that sin required atonement, and that the atonement was death. He managed to introduce sin to earth via Eve, and as a consequence all humans were sinners and had to die. But God spotted a loophole in this rule. While the death had to be proportional to the sins committed, it didn't have to be the sinner themselves who died. Someone else could die for them, but this would only work if the person who died for them had not sinned themselves. Also, a cheap angel wasn't going to be enough to pay for the sins of the whole world, but God had a son, Jesus, who would do. This Jesus developed an anthropomorphized narrative where he was conceived by God and a heavenly woman and born in the spirit realm. Then later he was crucified as a sacrifice for the sins of the earth, resurrected and elevated to a high-ranking position in the heavenly hierarchy. Then, around the year 70, in the turmoil of the Judeo-Roman War, the anthropomorphization process took another step. Mark wrote a gospel which gave Jesus an earthly existence. He did this by associating Jesus with earlier figures from the church, plus a good bit of pure invention. Anyway, once he had done this, the idea took off rapidly for two reasons. One is that a personal saviour who had been on earth, lived, suffered and died with us had more appeal than fantastical imaginings about events in outer space. Paul too was writing in this period, and the mythicist theory exists because Paul doesn't say what historicity expects him to say. He makes no reference to earthly deeds or sayings of Jesus, but he does make a handful of infuriatingly non-specific statements about Jesus that can be interpreted either way. He says in Galatians that Jesus was born of a woman, born under the law, which again sounds earthly, but he uses a Greek word for born that could mean created in heaven. So now turning to Revelation. If Revelation is dated to the reign of Nero of 54 to 68 AD, that makes it pre-Mark, and its Christology may help us discriminate between these two theories. It has been implicated in multiple failed predictions about the return of Jesus and the end of the world from the Middle Ages down to our current time. Could Revelation help us with things like, was Jesus going to return to earth or come for the first time? Was he born of a woman on earth or born of a woman in heaven? Was he crucified by Pilate in Judea or by evil demons in outer space? It does mention these things, so for what it's worth, Revelation does not indicate a prior earthly visit by Jesus. Then there is the reference to every eye shall see him, including those who pierced him. We can't infer that this means John believed Christ had previously been on earth, as it is a reference to Hosea. Revelation mentions a temple 9 times, and all other mentions are clearly to heavenly temples. Chapter 12 has a possible clue about Paul's born of a woman statement. Then a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and with the moon under her feet, and on her head was a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and screaming in labour pains, struggling to give birth. A huge red dragon that had 7 heads and 10 horns, and on its heads were 7 diadem crowns. So the woman gave birth to a son, a male child, who is going to rule over all the nations with an iron rod. That this image of the heavenly birth of Jesus was part of John's theology. If so, and that theology was shared by Paul, then it helps us in 2 ways. Firstly, it clarifies that Paul's Galatian statement of born of a woman was born in heaven of a woman. Secondly, it also explains Paul's strange use of words. To introduce somebody as being born of a woman when everybody else was born of a woman is redundant, and consequently nobody ever does it. Then not only does it clarify Paul's meaning, but it also explains his use of words and why he used the term genomenos, which means something like created by God, rather than genos, meaning born. As with Paul, we have no overtly historicist comments and a small number of ambiguous pointers. The born of a woman pericope does strengthen the argument that Paul was referring to a spiritual birth of Jesus in Galatians. Overall, I would say that Revelation does favour mythicism.